Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive.
Yeah.
And today, we're really going deep into a tool that's used to get a glimpse into the minds of teenagers.
Yes.
It's the MMPI-A.
The Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory for Adolescents.
Yeah, and it's kind of like I was saying before, like a psychological x-ray.
Right.
To kind of see what's going on beneath the surface
Absolutely.
of teenage behavior.
Yeah, it can be really remarkable the way that this instrument can give us insight into the inner workings of the teenage mind.
Yeah.
We're going to be using for this deep dive the third edition of the book, MPI-A, Assessing Adolescent Psychopathology by Robert P. Archer.
I have to admit, some of the things I learned in this book were pretty surprising.
Oh, yeah.
Like, for instance, did you know that teenagers today actually report experiencing more signs of potential psychological issues than teenagers did just a few decades ago?
That's right.
Even when their scores fall within the normal range?
Right. Yeah, and this really gets us thinking about what exactly is normal?
Right.
What defines that? And Archer's book really suggests that maybe some of the societal shifts and the kind of pressure cooker environment a lot of these kids are growing up in could be playing a role in this.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder if we were to kind of recalibrate the MMPI-A.
Yeah.
Based on today's teenagers. Like, would our whole understanding of normal adolescent psychology look completely different?
It's a huge question, and I think researchers are grappling with that right now.
Right.
But, you know, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, maybe we should step back and look at how this tool was even developed in the first place.
You know, when I first heard about the MMPI-A, I kind of assumed it was something that was like designed from the ground up for teenagers.
Right.
But it turns out it's got kind of a long history, right?
It does. It actually evolved from the adult version of the MMPI. And back in the 1980s, researchers started realizing that when they were using the adult version on teenagers, the results weren't really adding up.
Yeah, it's like using a map of Paris to navigate Tokyo.
Exactly.
Sure, there might be some similarities, but you're going to get lost.
You're going to get lost, exactly. So they realized that they needed something specifically calibrated for the teenage psyche.
Because teenagers are not just miniature adults.
No, they are not. They are not.
They experience the world in different ways.
Yes, different ways. And their emotions are more volatile.
Right.
They express themselves differently.
So researchers realized they needed a tool that was specifically calibrated for the teenage psyche.
Precisely. And that's what led to the MMPI-A.
Okay.
And they made sure that when a teenager takes the MMPI-A, their answers are being compared to other teenagers their age.
Okay.
Not adults. And this is a really important part of the process of what we call norming the test.
Okay, so that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But, you know, let's be honest. I think a lot of people out there, myself included, maybe have a little bit of skepticism.
Sure.
About personality tests, especially for teenagers.
Right.
I mean, how do we know if they're even being truthful, especially when, you know, maybe they feel pressure to present themselves in a certain way?
And this is really where the brilliance of the MMPI-A shines.
Okay.
Because it's not just a straightforward list of questions.
Right.
Built into the test, there are these really clever validity scales.
Okay.
So, for example, you have the VRUN scale, which looks for inconsistencies in how a teenager answers questions that have similar meanings.
So if teenagers are trying to, like, you know,
fake good,
fake
bad,
or fake bad, these validity scales would kind of catch that.
Exactly. It's like a built-in lie detector.
I like that.
So these scales really help to ensure that the results are reliable.
Okay.
And that clinicians get a more accurate picture of what's really going on.
Okay, so that makes sense. But it's still a pretty hefty test, right?
It is.
I mean, I remember taking standardized tests in high school.
Oh, yeah.
It felt like running a marathon.
The MMPI-A does require some stamina.
Yeah.
It has 478 true-false questions.
Wow.
Covering a huge range of topics.
Okay.
But it's not just about the individual answers. It's about the patterns that emerge.
So it's like a puzzle.
Yes.
You're looking for the clues and connecting the dots.
Exactly.
To see the bigger picture.
That's a great way to put it. And that's really where the different scales of the MMPI-A come in. And each scale offers a different lens to view the adolescent psyche.
Okay.
So you have your basic clinical scales, looking at things like depression and anxiety.
Okay.
And then you have your content scales, which delve into more specific areas.
Okay.
Like family problems or school difficulties.
Okay, so let's maybe unpack some of these scales and how they work. And, you know, what are some of the key insights that the MMPI-A can really reveal about a teenager?
Okay, great. I think one of the most valuable things the MMPI-A can do is help us distinguish between what might be typical teenage angst, and signs of a deeper issue.
Right.
I mean, adolescence is often a roller coaster with dramatic ups and downs, but how do we know when those downs are something more serious?
That's where those age-based norms come in, right?
Exactly.
It's like if you're trying to figure out if a teenager was unusually tall, you wouldn't compare their height to like the average height of adults. You'd want to look at, growth charts for their specific age group.
Exactly. The MMPI-A does the same thing for emotional and psychological well-being.
Right.
It allows us to see if a teenager's experiences are outside the expected range for their age and developmental stage.
And the book is some really compelling examples of how this plays out in real life.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of the case study about Mark, the teenager who was struggling with depression, and his scores on the depression scale were significantly higher than the average for his age. So that was a clear red flag.
Exactly. And that red flag helps guide his treatment.
Right.
It's not just about labeling or diagnosing. It's about understanding the underlying dynamics.
Right.
And in Mark's case, the MMPI-A also revealed this pattern of denial, indicating that he might be struggling to acknowledge and process his emotions.
It's like the test was saying, hey, pay attention.
Yes.
To this. There's more going on here than meets the eye.
Exactly. And that kind of insight can be really invaluable for tailoring interventions. It can help therapists and counselors to understand not just what a teenager is experiencing, but how they're coping, what their strengths are, and where they might need extra support.
Of course, no psychological tool is foolproof.
Of course not.
And I found myself thinking about this a lot while I was reading the book. Just the potential for misinterpretation.
Right.
Especially given all the complexities we've been talking about.
Yeah, you're hitting on a really crucial point, and that's why Archer emphasizes the importance of using the MMPI-A as part of a holistic assessment.
Right.
It's one piece of the puzzle, not the entire picture.
So it's not just about looking at the scores in isolation.
Right.
It's about combining them with clinical interviews, observations, feedback from parents and teachers, all those different pieces of information we can gather.
Yes, all of that.
To get a complete picture of the teenager.
Exactly. And it's also essential to remember that the MMPI-A is a tool for understanding, not for labeling.
Right.
The goal is to identify areas where a teenager might need help.
Right.
Not to define them by their test results.
That reminds me of something else we touched on earlier, which is the evolving nature of the MMPI-A. Technology is transforming so many aspects of our lives, and psychological assessment is no exception.
You're right. We're already seeing the emergence of online platforms. Wow. For administering and scoring the MMPI-A, which could make it more accessible to people in remote areas or who might be uncomfortable with traditional testing settings.
It's like so many other things that have moved: online shopping, banking, even doctor's appointments.
Right.
It just makes sense that psychological assessments would follow suit.
It does. And imagine the possibilities for personalization.
Wow.
What if we could create adaptive versions of the MMPI-A that adjust the questions based on the teenager's responses in real time, or integrate the test with other technologies like wearable sensors that track physiological data to get an even richer picture of their emotional state?
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
It's a little unsettling, too.
It is a little bit, but
fascinating. Are there ethical concerns?
Huge ethical concerns, yeah.
When you start talking about integrating psychological assessment with technology.
Data privacy, security, the potential for misuse or misinterpretation. These are all things we need to be very mindful of as we navigate this new frontier.
It's like we're holding this incredibly powerful tool.
Yes.
And we have a responsibility to use it wisely and ethically.
Precisely. And that responsibility is especially crucial when we're dealing with teenagers who are at such a vulnerable and formative stage in their lives. Their brains are still developing, their identities are still taking shape, and they're particularly susceptible to being labeled or stigmatized.
Speaking of vulnerable stages, one of the sections in the book that really stuck with me was the discussion of how the MMPI-A can help us understand specific psychological disorders in teenagers.
Right. That's a critical area where the MMPI-A can offer really invaluable insights. And let's take anxiety disorders, for example.
Okay.
They're incredibly common in adolescence, but they can manifest in so many different ways.
You've got generalized anxiety disorder, where someone is constantly worried about everything. And then you've got social anxiety, where specific situations trigger intense fear. And then there's all those nuances in between.
Yeah.
So how does the MMPI-A help us tease those apart?
Well, the MMPI-A can help distinguish between different types of anxiety by looking at patterns of responses across various scales.
Okay.
It can also help determine the severity of the anxiety and how it's impacting the teenager's life.
I'm thinking of Carolyn, the teenager from the book, who was struggling with social anxiety and school refusal.
Right.
And her MMPI-A profile revealed elevated scores related to anxiety and social introversion. But it also showed that she was expressing her distress through physical symptoms.
Right.
Like stomach aches and headaches.
Yes. That's a great example of how the MMPI-A can help us understand the nuanced ways that anxiety can manifest.
Right.
And in Carolyn's case, recognizing that she was somaticizing her anxiety was crucial for developing an effective treatment plan.
It's like the test was saying, hey, there's a lot going on beneath the surface here.
Yes.
Let's address those physical symptoms.
Right.
But let's also dig deeper and help Carolyn develop coping skills and build her self-esteem.
Exactly. And this principle applies to other disorders as well. For example, the MMPI-A can help us understand eating disorders, which are often shrouded in secrecy and denial.
You know, when I was a teenager, eating disorders weren't really talked about openly.
Right.
It felt like something that happened to other people, not someone you knew.
Yeah.
But now it seems like we're more aware of how prevalent these issues are.
It's true, and the MMPI-A can be a valuable tool for identifying the underlying psychological characteristics that might be contributing to an eating disorder.
Okay.
Such as perfectionism, low self-esteem, and a distorted body image.
And it can also help to pinpoint any co-occurring issues like depression, anxiety, or substance abuse.
Precisely. Remember Rebecca, the teenager from the book who was struggling with anorexia? Her MMPI-A profile not only revealed concerns related to perfectionism and body image, but it also highlighted her strong need for control, which is often a key factor in eating disorders.
And it showed that she was using food restriction as a way to cope with underlying emotional distress.
Right. The MMPI-A allowed her therapist to see the function of her eating disorder, which is crucial for developing a treatment plan that addresses the root causes, not just the surface behaviors.
And then there's trauma, which can have such a profound impact on a teenager's life.
Absolutely.
How does the MMPI-A help us to understand and address the effects of traumatic experiences?
Well, trauma can leave lasting scars on the developing brain, and the MPI-A can be incredibly helpful in assessing for some of the common psychological consequences like post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety, and even dissociative symptoms.
Jared, the teenager from the book who witnessed a violent crime, comes to mind.
Yeah.
His MMPI-A profile clearly indicated he was grappling with PTSD, showing elevations on scales related to anxiety, trauma, and aggression.
And it revealed specific symptoms like nightmares, flashbacks, and difficulty concentrating, all classic signs of PTSD.
Right.
This information was instrumental in guiding his treatment, which included trauma-focused therapy and support in managing his anxiety and anger.
It's a powerful reminder that trauma can often manifest in subtle ways. Yes.
And the MMPI-A can be a valuable tool for uncovering those hidden wounds and ensuring teenagers get the help they need to heal.
Absolutely. Now, shifting gears a bit, it's important to acknowledge that the MMPI-A isn't just used in clinical settings.
Right.
It's also used in forensic settings like juvenile justice.
Right.
Which raises a whole other layer of ethical considerations.
We touched on this earlier.
We did.
But it's worth emphasizing that when the stakes are so high, decisions about detention, sentencing, or even transfer to adult court, we need to be incredibly careful.
Absolutely.
About how we're using and interpreting the MMPI-A.
Archer cautions against over-reliance on test scores in these contexts. It's crucial to remember that the MMPI-A can't predict the future.
Right.
It can't tell us for certain whether a teenager will engage in criminal behavior.
And it certainly shouldn't be used to justify harsh punishments.
No.
Or deny teenagers opportunities for rehabilitation.
Exactly. We need to remember that these are young people who are still developing,
right,
who are capable of change, and who deserve a chance to turn their lives around.
It sounds like the role of the clinician in these situations is incredibly important.
It is. We have a responsibility to advocate for these teenagers.
Right.
To ensure their rights are protected and to educate the courts and the public about the complexities of adolescence.
Right.
And the limitations of psychological testing.
It's about striking a balance between public safety and supporting the well-being of young people. Who are often struggling to find their way.
And it's about challenging the societal tendency to view teenagers through a lens of fear and mistrust.
Instead, we need to see them as individuals with potential for growth and change.
The MMPI-A, when used responsibly and ethically, can be a powerful tool in that effort. It can help us move beyond stereotypes and gain a deeper understanding of the unique challenges and strengths of each teenager.
It can help us see them as individuals, not just scores on a test.
And it can help us support them on their journey toward becoming healthy, resilient adults.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in part 2 of our deep dive.
We've explored the complexities of anxiety disorders, eating disorders, and trauma, and we've grappled with the ethical dilemmas of using psychological assessment in high-stakes situations. Join us in part 3, where we'll pull all of this together and explore some final thought-provoking questions about the nature of adolescence and the future of psychological assessment. Welcome back to our deep dive into the MMPI-A.
Yeah.
We've spent the last 2 parts really exploring how this tool can be used to understand the minds of teenagers.
Yeah.
And we also looked at some of the ethical considerations that come with using such a powerful instrument.
Right. So as we kind of wrap up our exploration, I'm curious to hear from you, what were some of the things that really stood out to you as particularly surprising or thought-provoking from this deep dive?
Well, for me, one of the biggest things was just realizing that the MMPI-A isn't just some static test gathering dust on a shelf.
Right.
It's a living, breathing tool that's constantly being refined and validated through decades and decades of research.
That's a great point. It really speaks to the ongoing effort to try to understand the human mind, and especially the often very turbulent waters of adolescence.
And that research has uncovered some pretty fascinating patterns.
Oh, yeah?
Like, for instance, the fact that teenagers today are reporting more signs of potential psychological issues than teenagers did a generation ago, even when their scores fall within the normal range.
Right, and it really gets us thinking, are teenagers today actually facing more challenges? Or are they simply more open about their struggles?
It makes you wonder.
Yeah.
And it makes me think back to something you said earlier about, what if the MMPI-A were to be re-normed today?
Yeah.
Would our whole understanding of adolescent psychology shift?
It really highlights that connection between individual development and the larger social context.
Right.
And I think it reminds us that psychological assessment isn't about applying these rigid labels.
Right.
It's about understanding individuals within their own environments and their life experiences.
Speaking of understanding, I was really struck by the book's emphasis on viewing adolescence as a process, a period of constant growth and transformation.
Absolutely.
It's not just some static phase that we all pass through on our way to adulthood.
It's a time of profound change and immense potential.
Yeah, and I think that's a really crucial perspective to keep in mind.
Absolutely.
When we're trying to interpret the MMPI-A, we can't just look at a teenager's scores in isolation.
No.
We have to consider where they are in their developmental journey, what challenges they're facing, what strengths they have, and what supports are available to them.
Yes, and all of it.
That's like trying to understand a complex ecosystem. You can't just look at a single species in isolation.
Right.
You have to consider its interactions with the environment, its relationship with other organisms,
and the factors that are influencing its survival and growth.
And I think that's a really beautiful analogy because it underscores the importance of seeing each teenager as an individual, not just a set of scores.
Not just data points, right?
On a test.
The MMPI-A can offer us these really valuable insights, but it can never tell us the whole story.
And that brings us back to the ethical considerations we've been talking about. The MMPI-A is a powerful tool.
Yes, it is.
But it's only as good as the people who wield it.
That's right. We have a responsibility to use it carefully.
Right.
To be aware of its limitations. And to always interpret the results within a larger context.
It's about approaching assessment with humility, recognizing that we don't have all the answers, and that the teenager themselves is often the best expert.
I mean, as expert on their own experience.
On their own experience. We need to listen carefully, ask the right questions, and create a space where teenagers feel safe sharing their truth.
And that responsibility becomes even more critical when we're dealing with really sensitive issues.
Right.
Like trauma, abuse, suicidal thoughts.
The MMPI-A can provide valuable clues.
Yes.
But it's not a substitute for compassion, empathy, and really deep understanding of the individual's circumstances.
Well said.
As we start to wrap up, I can't help but think about the future of psychological assessment. Technology is rapidly changing so many different fields.
It is.
And it seems inevitable that it's going to have a profound impact on how we understand and assess mental health.
It's an exciting and somewhat daunting frontier.
Yeah.
On the one hand, technology offers this potential for more personalized and accessible assessments.
Right.
Tailored to the specific needs of each individual.
Like, imagine using artificial intelligence to analyze huge amounts of data and identify patterns and develop much more precise interventions.
Or even a future where wearable sensors are tracking our emotional states in real time and providing personalized feedback and support when we need it most.
But as we kind of embrace these possibilities, we also have to proceed with a lot of caution.
A lot of caution.
We need to be mindful of data privacy.
Absolutely.
Algorithmic bias and the potential for technology to dehumanize or exploit vulnerable individuals.
Very important point.
It's a good reminder that technology is a tool.
It is.
And like any tool, it can be used for good or for ill.
Right.
It's up to us to make sure that technology serves human well-being.
Absolutely.
And not the other way around.
Well, as we conclude our deep dive into the MMPI-A, I hope that our listeners are walking away with a deeper appreciation for just how complex adolescence is and the power and the limitations of psychological assessment and really the importance of using our knowledge responsibly and ethically.
It's been a really incredible journey.
It has.
Exploring the minds of teenagers, navigating all the ethical challenges, and pondering the future of assessment in a world that's changing so rapidly.
It really has, and I hope this is just the beginning of the exploration for our listeners. There's so much knowledge out there waiting to be discovered. Keep diving deep, stay curious, and never stop learning.
Until next time, fellow deep divers. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking those hidden gems of insight that are out there.